back to Monroe County, and I said, how can you afford that? You'll take a big pay cut. She said, no. When you factor in the family health plan, it's actually I'll be making a little more, especially when you calculate in the travel. Well, when I was still in Monroe County, I'm not sure exactly the year, but in lieu of a raise one year, the teachers elected to get the family health insurance plan that they have in place now. I noted the other night, Thursday, this board adopted the memorandum of understanding in which that insurance plan is in place. I consider the memorandum of understanding a covenant with the teachers. And I understand the budget. The budget is, it's been a tough thing, and I think July 10th is the next budget workshop, so it looks like it'll fall to the next person. The ability to balance that budget is not only desired, it's required. So I know there will be some hard lessons that would be taken, but since the board adopted the memorandum of understanding Thursday night, cutting into that insurance plan could not be a consideration for me. Now, then you get into, well, where are you going to balance the budget? Well, there's been a lot of discussion. Y'all have heard that. And the insurance is a piece of it. The salaries are a piece of it. The state sent down 2% to go to salaries and not to get too complicated, but when the state average salary index is below the state average, you can't funnel money into fringe benefit. It's got to go into the salaries. So that's what has to happen. Now, how we're going to balance the budget, we'll have to figure that out. And am I out of time? I didn't know there was time limit on each answer. 3 minutes, I'm sorry. Okay, I've got more to say. I'll try to get it in later. Yes, I want to talk to that because I think it says something. Another wisdom I picked up from Dr. Forty was the 5-year plan. And he always, in terms of the facilities, there was a plan. If someone wanted something, then they got in the back of the line on the 5th year, and that was how things were prioritized. We were talking about Tellico Plains High School, that used to be Tellico Plains High School and Massillville High School, and you remember those gyms fell in within hours of each other. I think it's 68, 69, somewhere back then. But those schools are in disrepair now. And so you have a need. I have shocked people when I told them, people who are familiar with Central High School, I have shocked them when I told them that Men's Central High School is older than Massillville Middle and Tellico Plains Junior High. It is an older building. I think that speaks to your maintenance and care for what you have. We have to take good care of what we have. You do that in your homes. Schools are no different. So the caring for the facilities has to be a priority for all our buildings, and including those two. I also saw in the 5-year plan by June of 2018 or 19 there would be a plan in place for these schools, and it's June of 2019. So that'll be another thing that'll fall to the next director of schools. So thank you.
So before I start with the question, I want to first just congratulate Tellico Plains Junior High. He brought that up, and I understand that their Beta Club won the championship for People of Living Literature, and so I want to make sure that we're recognizing those students who performed well over at the state level concerning that matter. So when we think through insurance, I'm excited to death to maybe, hopefully, become an employee of Monroe County Schools, because it's unheard of that you pay 100% of an individual's insurance and that you pay 85% on the family plan. That is like a huge win for the teachers and the employees here. And hopefully, as a future employee, I would say that needs to stay. emphatically, I would support that it does need to absolutely stay. One of the things that you're thinking through in the budget, and he says, what about these two schools who we know that there was a plan maybe to replace? You've got to get down with your budget and your budget center managers. And I think you've got to go through and make a plan for everything that you have to have in that budget. And then you've got to look at your goals and your priorities and say, these are our goals and our priorities, and so we're going to use our resources or our funding to address those particular goals and those priorities. When you think about the management, and one of the things that we did, we put in 51 playgrounds, and playgrounds cost about $10,000 to $15,000. In the last 5 years, we've put in 51. So I know that you have to look at your budget. You've got to pay for what you have to pay for. Then you've got to say playgrounds, new buildings, maintenance are things that have to go at the top of the list, right along with academics and professional development. And then you start a plan. This is what we're going to do in phase 1, this is what we'll do in phase 2, and this is what we'll do in phase 3. And through that particular planning, you are able to address those things. I don't know that we stop there. I think whoever is in this particular position would need to build a bridge with the county commission and with the board and go in and have a conversation. Hey, we've looked at our budget. Let's be transparent. These are the things that we've seen. We've worked hard to cut out any waste that's in our budget. What could you do to help us now that we've gone back and we've done our due diligence to make sure we're being good stewards of the money? And so I think that's the second part of making sure that you're addressing the needs of that budget.
I'm going to take the second part of that question first, because in thinking about the buildings, a number that we don't talk about much kind of worries me. There is $52 million of debt that already exists in Monroe County. It's my understanding on buildings. I don't know how that money is being paid for, how that debt has been structured, if we're taking care of the principal on that. The first step in looking into our buildings is to look as just like you would do a project with your own home. Look at the debt that you have now, make sure it's structured carefully, and you've got a plan that's attacking that principal so you're knocking that out of the way. Because the thoughts of running that $52 million to $100 million, you know, where do we stop? So that has to be looked at first. Now, one of those two buildings is directly behind the building that I currently am principal at. I go over there quite often and talk with Ms. Hunt and tour the building. I know firsthand how badly some new things need to be done there. So a plan of action, like was mentioned, we've got to tackle the debt. Then we begin to look at how we can put these two new buildings into place. We do not live in a high-income area where the people here can afford to continue to raise and raise and raise and raise taxes. We've got to very carefully look at what we have to work with and figure out what we can afford. You know, I think about my two elderly parents, and they have a very small home, but continuing to add to what they have to pay. That's kind of hard for me to ask them, you know. So I told you my family affects, and I think my family represents Monroe County quite a bit. The other part of that, the insurance that Dave Evans mentioned, that is an amazing benefit, and that allows teachers here, when they do get their 30 years in, to truly have the choice to retire. Whereas in other places, if you don't have that insurance in place, really that choice of retiring is not available to you because the cost of that insurance is so exorbitant. We do not want to take that away from teachers, because sometimes after 30, 31, 32 years of chasing after kindergartners, you become tired. It's a hard job and it wears you out. So I would hate to see that option go away from teachers. I do worry about how sustainable it will be for our incoming teachers that we have, but every effort needs to be made possible to keep that that into place. Early on in my teaching, that I'm out of time, sorry.
This is Ron Cox. He has a question for all members, or all candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hooper, Dr. McClendon, and Dr. Swanson. What would be your plans for expanding EPSOs for our high school students?
They didn't hear it.
What would be your plans for expanding EPSOs for our high school students?
Go ahead. Thank you.
First every time. Hope that means something. I know a lot about early post-secondary opportunities. That's the new component that the state moved in a couple of years ago, and I referenced it in an earlier interview in regards to making a rigorous curriculum for our students can excel, both in the high schools and earlier. But the early post-secondary opportunities is programmed around the high school and a departure from our 3 high schools. One of those early post-secondary opportunities is dual credit. There are some offerings that you can actually test and obtain credit for the entry into the CCAT, the TCATs, or into other technical areas. Another example is dual enrollment. Dual enrollment, most of you are pretty familiar with. It would be like a student in high school senior English and taking a dual enrollment offering that they simultaneously get credit for the college curriculum and the high school curriculum. Another one that I don't think has been capitalized on as much as I would like to see it has to do with the advanced placement offerings. When I was in McMinn County, I was able to, during my course of secondary supervisor of instruction, I was able to, when I first started, we struggled to have one dual enrollment offering just in senior English. By the time I left, there was a plethora of offerings. We have many AP offerings. We have many dual enrollment offerings. An advanced placement offering on a college transcript is very advantageous, especially to get into elite institutions like Duke, Harvard, and some of those places. I think it helps several of our students in McMinn County get into the service academies like West Point and the Naval Academy and such. So I think it's important on those early post-secondary opportunities for our students. A byproduct to that and related, and I think unless things have changed, it's new here, but it's the opportunity for 8th graders to take high school content. If you allow 8th graders to take high school content, it frees up more offerings later in their high school career to get into more rigorous offerings to enhance their transcripts. So not only is it advantageous to the students themselves, but it's also a positive reflection on the school system. So thank you.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because one of the things that we're doing that I would think would be very advantageous to the students, the high school students in Monroe County, students coming in as freshmen actually almost should look at it as a college courses. And so what we would do is each student that comes in as a freshman should have what we call a 4-year plan with what we think of as a major and a minor. And what that means is if I am a freshman student and I think that I have some interest in health occupation, I need to set out my 4-year plan so that I'm going to be able to take some dual enrollment credit courses or some advanced placement courses by the time I get to my junior and senior year. So that might be my major. My minor might be percussion, because I might be a band student, and so I want to make sure that I'm spending a great deal of time with that. And so one of the things in looking at students coming in and deciding on, I'm going to have my 4-year plan with a major and a minor, you can take them through dual credit. We need to be looking at each of our CTE courses to make sure that those particular courses are actually leading to a certificate. It's not enough for you to matriculate through if when you get to the end of auto mechanics or you get to the end of some of those other courses, if you don't actually have a certificate. I'd like to lead those students right up to the door where they're able to take their state assessment, they're able to go into work using that certificate. I think that's something we need to look at, because a good diesel mechanic starts out making about $50,000. And so we need to make sure that our children who are participating in those courses are coming out. We think through, the other piece of that is 8th grade and 7th grade. So we have students that are smart enough that even in the 7th grade year, they should be taking pre-algebra, so that their 8th grade year they can take algebra and foreign language, and then that leaves them room as they matriculate through high school to take those upper level courses and go into their first year of college having probably almost a semester worth of college credit. And I think we have lots of students here in Monroe County who would be able to take advantage of that program. I think that we need to make sure we're building good relationships with neighboring institutions like Cleveland State, Maryville College, and others to see what kind of relationship could we build so that we are making sure that we are having our students have those opportunities. And I think something else that you have to think through, what about our students who maybe have missed the mark, who are on the cusp of maybe dropping out? Because sometimes we have a tendency to pay attention to our best and our brightest, but we forget that there are some other lights that need an opportunity to be turned on as well. And so there need to be some options as well for those students as far as support in GED programs and course recovery and those types of programs as well. They need an opportunity with those. Thank you.
I had a conversation at the end of last week with a gentleman, and we were talking about CTE courses. He said, "Do you know Steve Harris?" And I said, "I sure do know Steve Harris that teaches at Sequoia High School. I had both of his daughters in my classroom as I went through Ruleville Elementary." And he began to tell me about Steve's welding program that he does here at Sequoia High School, and how those students are able to, once they have finished that here, then the welding opportunities that they're able to find really good jobs to make good money through hopefully a certification program. We have got to make sure that that same level of quality is available at all 3 schools and all of our CTE programs, that as they go through them, there is certification where if they want to go into the employment level, they will be able to do that. Or if that certification allows them to maybe go from, say, LPN to a RN transition type program. That's where we start. The second part of that, it was mentioned about high school courses being taught at the junior high level. During my time at Ruleville, I taught Algebra 1 for a number of years, for as long as they would allow us to do Algebra 1. So I generally had a group of students. I tried to always get at least 10 that I was able to divide my time with and do an Algebra 1 course there at Ruleville. And that enabled them to go to the high school and then take other upper-level math courses. And when they stopped doing that, I felt like that was a huge mistake, because those kids were able to move right along in their math training. The hard part of that is, though, when you're doing those like Algebra 1 at the middle school level, at the end of the year, that child's going to take the same TN Ready test in math. So the students that I worked with took it pretty good, but I would make sure that I put them through the same test prep as my other regular ed math kids and getting them ready for that. So you've got to think about making sure. You wouldn't want the kids to end up with some bad TN Ready scores because they were working on algebra. So you got to keep that going as well. Dual enrollments classes, there is not a better bargain available. Both of my two daughters took as many dual enrollment courses as they were allowed to take. The advantage of going in as a freshman and not having such a high load of classes on your first years is excellent. So that has to absolutely be continued as it's done. But the big thing, again, I think we can improve on, because I see a huge percent of our boys that are not going to go to college, is improving our CTE.
Ezra Clemens.
Holly's coming to the front. The next candidate to be first to talk will be Dr. McClendon. We'll let her go first the next time.
My question is for all three candidates. No one can deny the impact a positive work environment has on the success of a school. As director, what would be your role in helping to maintain or create positive work environments at both the central office and school levels?
So frequently we say we need to make sure that we do what is best for children. I think that you forget that you must do what is best for children and families, but you also must do what is best for the employees. Because lots of times on a child's day, a teacher's worst day, that is the child's best hope. So one of the things I think is there has to be a transparency. You know, I've not been here, and so I only know what I've read in the paper. I only know what I hear in board meetings about the way that we do things. I think that I have heard over and over again as I call members of the community that we have staff at the central office who are phenomenal. They need an opportunity to have some support and direction on the direction they need to go. I have heard over and over again, we've got great teachers in schools and great administrators in schools, and they just need some support. I think one thing that might be a little bit different about me is I have some strategies that I think I'd like to bring in. So one of the things as I talked to community members, they said, there are jobs and we never really know how people are appointed or they get the jobs. And they said, I have a real problem with that. I heard that over and over again in my interviews with community members. And I think that we need to go to a transparent situation. Jobs should be posted. I think there should be a committee at the school made up of the administrative team. There should be a teacher on that team. There should be a community member or parent or PTO president that is a part of that interview team. And that way I think that people could be interviewed. It could be a fair process. There should be a rubric. There should be scores. And then everyone can feel good about the transparency of that particular process. I think that raises self-esteem. Something that when I was calling around to community members and talking to teachers and even students, they said, we never are recognized for anything from the central office. Nobody recognizes us. Our principal does a great job of recognizing us frequently, but I never hear from the central office. And I said, well, is there something as simple as if you got a call from me on your birthday, or if you got a birthday card from the central office, would that make a difference? They said, absolutely. I said, well, there are only 321 teachers here. I think someone could give you a call for your birthday or send a card. They said, Dr. McClendon, I'd be happy if they just sent me a ream of paper. So I think that what you have to do is really listen, and that's what I tried to do on all my calls, was to really listen to see what is it that teachers want. Frequently, we think esteem is tied to monetary. Most of us did not go into education because we thought we were going to get rich. We had a passion, we cared about children. There were things that made us go into education. And so I think we need to ask the teachers and the faculty at central office and really listen to what it is they want that would make them feel good about getting up and giving their best on their worst day to those children.
It might go a little faster if we held our applause till the end, maybe. Because we still have a lot of questions.
I think to make an environment positive And I feel like at Tellico Elementary, where I've been for the last 15 years, you'll find it to be one of the most positive environments around. But what you have to do to have a really positive environment is teamwork. Now, you build teams at all different levels. Now, when I first went there, I rearranged people, and I rearranged people. Some of it, I saw, you take the people you have, and you try to put them where they can do the best job possible and serve the students in the best way possible. And that's what I did. I shifted and changed till I got to a spot where I felt really good about where everyone was. Now, in part of that shifting and changing that I did with the teachers there, I looked too to make sure I was building compatible teams at each grade level where I was getting groups of people together that truly enjoyed working together. So when they're staying Tuesday afternoon for an hour on a PLC, it's a comfortable, nice environment, and they're going to enjoy sitting there talking, figuring out what to do with their students. Now, when you have those grade level teams going really good, then you got to have cross teams. When you have cross teams at your place, you have all sorts of different opportunities for leadership in your school. It might be being in charge of a Veterans Day program. It might be the person in charge of your faculty dinner. All those different things. So you build cross teams with that. You take a few people from each of those different grade levels and you build different teams. Same thing for a data team. You try to then get people from all the different grade levels to work with your data team. And pretty soon you've got your grade level teams working together, and then you've got cross-level teams working together, and everybody's working out really good, and I think we've managed to accomplish that at Tellico Elementary. Now, toward the end of the school, on our last staff development day, Shauna Bowers is our elementary supervisor, and Shauna is huge into teamwork, and I really like that about Shauna. She wanted the Madisonville primary second grade teachers to come and meet with our second grade teachers and to basically work on test prep. What are you going to do? How are you going to get ready? What are going to be your practice activities? Well, those two groups of ladies from both schools came together, and they ended up having a great day working and talking. I'm sure they talked about way more than test prep, but they ended up with some very positive relationships after that day. So county-wide, we've got to continue to build opportunities for positive teamwork.
Sonia Harden. No, you can't.
Oh, it shut me down.
Sorry.
Ez, thank you for that question. I've known Ezra a long time, and I think that is a big question and a big priority for me is this school system raising the level of morale, because you have a reason to be proud of your efforts and what you do. I feel like sometimes, I've said this before, on our accountability model, there's 1,000 ways to fail. And when you're successful, you got to celebrate the successes, not ignoring where you fall short, but not let that dictate the narrative when overall you've done well. And I say to the Monroe County teachers and administrators, paraprofessionals, y'all are doing a good job. I educated my kids in this school system. I believe in what we're doing in this school system. Now, how do you accomplish that? Well, the first thing I would believe in is being a truth teller and building trust. And I don't know how you operate if people can't depend on what you say. Now, sometimes you may not respond at that moment because you always know, and I've learned, it's 27 years of school administration, that what this one says may be countered later by this one. But I think it's important to listen to all. And when you make a decision, it's a decision and not a consideration. So that would be a big priority for me, is earning the trust of the employees of this county and the school board. I believe being positive is better than being negative. You know, I didn't bring any suckers tonight, but I believe that teachers respond to notes, as she alluded to, and they respond to a good pat on the back and a job well done comment. That doesn't cost anything. And I believe if we convey that, and I would convey that to the central office, I would convey that to our administrators, our teachers need to feel encouraged and supported, both emotionally and also in terms of providing what they need. The celebrations I've mentioned, I've worked alongside many of y'all. Many of you I actually had in class years ago, and I just believe in what you do. I've seen your work from outside the system. I think I can bring some ideals back to this system, and I know that I can support and help the teachers and administrators grow. And another thing I would say, you get asked a lot of questions, but I would just say I'd play with the team I inherit. Now, we're going to go to work and try to get better, and I'm going to try to help on that, but I'll play with the team we inherited, and whatever changes need to be made, I'll make them subsequent as I get informed to the changes that will be needed, because I'm sure there will be some. But I thank you for all that you do for these students.
This question is for all three candidates. There's been some discussion on contracting custodial care and possibly maintenance, and I'd like to know how you personally feel about that.
If you saw the newspaper at the beginning of last year, there was a picture of my custodian, Karen Hamilton, standing out front, helping a child out of a car door. Now, Miss Karen is much more to our school than the lady that just sweeps the floor and picks up the garbage. She cares as much for the kids as any teacher in that building. And it is really important to me to have a staff of people there at our school that I know, that I'm used to seeing every day, that care about the school and our kids. Some of those kids would miss Miss Karen more than they would me when they got out of the car in the morning. So I do not think that that is a good idea to start contracting out those jobs. The kids in our school need to know and respect the persons in those jobs, and they are also a role model for the kids that they see every day.
I had the chance today I ran into an old friend, Stanley Harris, who's working now in the maintenance department, and we had a great conversation, and Mr. Mason as well. And, it was very enlightening to hear from them about the operations of maintenance. I believe as you consider the contracting, it would deserve consideration, but I think, you don't always save a lot of money. I would be concerned, because what I heard at the County Commission and Board joint meeting the other day, I'd be very concerned about handing that off to the county, and I would say that to any county commissioner. Because if you've got a building where the air conditioning has gone down, you don't need to be competing with other entities. You need to get your people in that building and fix the problem. And I think when you get into contracting, the availability of those doing that would concern me. I do think there would be situations that I know you already do contract some work, and I have learned more about the mowing piece. And I know there was offers and suggestions the other night to our board about ways to save money there, but I agree with what Mr. Hooper said. The people that you've got that are there with you, they're your people, and they're there to serve these kids and in the meantime serve the teachers. So while I wouldn't discount that, I would have to be convinced that that is a better way to do business than what we're doing right now. Thank you.
Well, I have lived through contracting your custodial services. In Legacy Shelby County Schools, we ran into a budget crunch, and we did contract out our custodial services, and it has literally never been the way it was. When you actually have custodians that are part of your family and a part of your school district culture, they take pride in that building. They take pride in those particular students, and they go the extra mile, just like the principal or the teacher or the paraprofessional or the bus driver does. So I am not for, given my experience with contracting out those services, I'm not for contracting out that work. We did the same thing when the merger happened. We elected to go into a contracting situation again, and we were even larger, and it has been an even larger sort of epic failure. No one thinks that the grounds have been kept up. Nobody thinks the buildings are kept up. Nobody thinks even the pest control is being done the way it was done previously, before, when we had people who were there in those buildings. Something that you never think about using contracting services, each of these buildings probably has 40 or 50 fire extinguishers, a building this particular size. When you start contracting, they only come to check those fire extinguishers when your contract is ready. So something you get into is you've got to negotiate the contract, it's got to go through an RFP, you've got to hire someone, and they've got to come out. All the while, you're putting students and faculty and families into a building where you're not checking those particular smoke detectors or fire alarm extinguishers. And so those are things that you have to be very careful when you start to throw around, we'll just contract that service out and it will be cheaper. I think you need to proceed with contracts with a lot of caution. I think you need to make sure you've got everything in your contract, so when there is failure to perform that particular duty, you can hold those people who are contracting accountable. And if they are not accountable, you've got to be willing to say, okay, what are we going to do as far as making sure they're taken care of and doing what they've said? And so for that reason, contracts are not something to be taken lightly. They should be avoided at all costs, especially when it comes to day-to-day routine things like our grounds and our maintenance. Another thing you have to be careful with the contracts, I understand there have been some air conditioning replacements, and I know we've bid those out and we've used contractors, but we've used obsolete air conditioning units. I understand that we use things that are no longer. So now we're having problems with them running. We're having problems getting the part to repair and maintain those. And so that's sort of a pushback against maybe using contracts and making sure, if you do or if you elect to use contracts, that you're doing your due diligence in working through the information in that contract.
Priscilla Gregory. Priscilla? She's coming.
Will jobs that offer opportunity for advancement for our teachers, will they be posted or appointed?
Ms. Gregory, I appreciate you asking that question. Here's how I would do business. It was expressed to me that we have a lagging talent pool in preparation for administrative jobs. The way I would do business is, if a principal retires, leaves, or whatever, the job will be posted. And when it's posted, then we will interview maybe not everybody that's posted. I hope you end up with 20 wanting an administrative job, but however many is necessary to get a solid pool and interview. It's been my experience, I've sat in on lots of interviews for other supervisors, for principals through the years. It's been my experience that when you have a pool, let's say of 5 applicants, that in that 5, you're going to have the one person that gets it. You're going to have a person that surprises you and their ability to articulate and show leadership qualities. You're going to have one that disappoints you in their interview that you might have thought would have done better, and then a couple in kind of in between. And I think what that does, it grows your talent pool. Now, if the person is in the building, say the assistant principal, I think we have assistant principals to prepare them to be the principal. And when a job comes opening, then I think the interview is needed and the posting to occur. Another advantage in that, let's say there is a pretty heir apparent for the job. It helps that prospective principal formulate their ideas and be able to articulate what they want to do while broadening the pool. And kind of come back to Ezra's question about morale. It hurts morale when people think, who have a desire for an upward trajectory, it hurts morale to feel like there's a glass ceiling. So it would be my practice to, when positions come open, to advertise in the administrative capacity. Now, sometimes inside the school building, you may have a transfer inside the school building. That's a different matter. But so far as administrative jobs, I would post those jobs and interview for placement. Thank you.
So I think there should be no appointments, and that means if you are actually in the cafeteria, if you're a principal, I think everyone should go through a fair and transparent process, just like the one I basically described first. There should be a cross-sectional group of people. They should be interviewed. There should be a rubric with the questions, and people write their answers down. And I think if people are not recipients of that position, especially if they're employees of the district, I think you should be able to share the information with them so that they improve and get better. Because lots of times when you interview for something, you might not do well at first. But if you never receive appropriate coaching and you had a desire, then you don't get better. You have nobody that reaches out to you. I think it's a sin if you're in a position and you're not training someone to take your place. I also believe that there should be some sort of leadership or administrators academy for people who are desiring becoming a leader. All of us are fading out, we're aging out, and we will need young, vibrant people who who have strong ideas and leadership qualities. And the way that you help them to grow is you put them in an academy or a leadership class, and then you work with them. You give them scenarios. You give them opportunities to, under your support, learn and grow. And then that way you're always building your bench. You've always got a bench to draw from. And so I think that's the strongest way to make sure that your morale is good and that you're getting a cross-sectional avenue of teachers and employees is through that transparency.
I have three-part answers to that question that was asked. First of all, in 2004, the current position that I hold was posted. There were about 10 candidates that put in for the job of principal at Tellico Plains Elementary. I went through an interview process, not as extreme as this, but I went through an interview process with a board of central office staff, as did all of the other candidates that applied for the job that year. It was very fair. It was very transparent. Mr. Mitch Millsaps did an excellent job with that. I suspect I would do that the exact same way as it was done with me. It was very correct in the way that he handled that. The second part on building leadership, if you've ever had come to one of my faculty meetings, it is not unusual to see someone from our faculty pool serving a leadership position. I think every one of my 17 teachers on staff this year served a leadership spot for the whole school somewhere. And part of that I do in the rubric at the end of the year on the professionalism. It asks you about, did you serve a leadership role in something? So I tried to make that opportunity available to all of my teachers And they did an excellent job taking that on, and it made my job at the end of the year really easy on that professionalism rubric. And thirdly, the final part of that is, I think it may have been about 5 years ago, when all the Race to the Top money come through, I went through a program called NISL, National Institute for School Leaders. We went 2 days a month to Lee University. They flew in 2 specialists. One of them come in, I can't remember the state, in New England, and the other one had been the Commissioner of Education in Mississippi. And we met with those folks for 2 days a month for 12 months. It was a very rigorous leadership program that I thought was excellent. So for inspiring leaders, opportunities like that would be a great chance.
Edith Miller.
Good evening. In my 43 years of service as a public education teacher and growing, I have been under the leadership of several superintendents, beginning with Superintendent Mr. Ellen McDowell to our present superintendent, Mr. Tim Blankenship. I have invested interest in this process. If I, Edith Miller, was presently serving on the board of Monroe County Schools and had to make a decision for the assignment of our next superintendent, what do you have to offer in this position that's above and beyond as a candidate in this selection that separates you from your contenders and that would convince me to vote for you?
Well, I have 32 years of experience in Monroe County. My entire family lives here in Monroe County. My children will continue to live here and teach here and work here. It is incredibly important to me that we continue to grow. That 60% of boys that I see leaving the high school that don't really have a plan for that post-secondary, that is extremely important to me that we work on that we develop a team that looks at that CTE program and tries to develop a plan for those students. So I would say that one of the biggest things is I have such a strong root in this community, and I plan to, once I have finally finished with here, I plan to continue to be a part of Monroe County and the continuing education system.
Edith, that's a great question. I actually have a why me page, so thank you for asking that. I would like to think that I have the ability to bring this school system together and get us pulling all in the same direction. I have said I don't want to be an us, them, I want us to be a we. And that's the way I've always tried to operate and have had success doing that. As I consider the 3 candidates, I think there's a couple of things that to me I possess in terms of my experiences, and that is the fact that I've spent so many years in the central office where I've gained a whole new perspective in that arena. The policy committee work I did for 16, 17 years was very enlightening. I know the board can appreciate that. Being chief negotiator and working with the teachers. Most of y'all haven't heard this, but I think the chief negotiator, I think it was 13 years, and we ended up getting our contracts. At that time, it was a contract, not a memorandum of understanding, but we got those contracts signed each and every year and with the full support of the board. being a testing coordinator, I think at the central office level gives me a perspective as I look at the end of course test, as I look at the 3 through 8 testing that takes place. I served on a state assessment task force. I was selected to be on there. I think there was 10 or 12 of us throughout the state. And as we were attempting to go to online testing and back in the mist days, and some of y'all know what I'm talking about there. So I think that I bring a breadth of experience. I know there's a lot of talent up here on this stage, but I feel like in a system this size, which McMinn County and Monroe County are very close to the same size, I think that gives me an insight into operations. I would then say I'm a Monroe County guy. I think y'all got at least one reference letter, and you know, even when I was in McMinn County, they saw me as a Monroe County guy. And I've raised my kids here. I've done a lot of work with youth. And through all this time, I've been a member of the community. I'm thankful that I was here during my parents. Deanna had referenced that desire to be close to her dad. So I was thankful that I was able to be with my mom and dad throughout their adult life until eventually they weren't with us anymore, and I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful my kids are products of the Monroe County school system, and they're excelling at the next level. I look out here in this audience and I see a lot of youth that's excelling at the next level, and I believe that my breadth of experience is one factor that would separate me from these other two talented people. Thank you.
I think currently I am leading a division that is very similar in size and in budget and with lots of the same complexities that are going on here. If you look at the poverty level here in Monroe County, the poverty level mirrors that in the inner city part of Memphis, where I currently am working. And so the details that make us be able to perform well, I think those particular strategies would be great to bring back here. I think I'm the best of both worlds. I'm from Monroe County. I received my foundation in education here. It made me be a strong academic person. It made me be a strong leader. I was able to go away from Monroe County and the way that you guys provide support and make it on my own under the things that I had learned and been taught here as a Monroe Countyan. And now I'm coming back because I think I've learned quite a deal, quite a bit that would help us here. There are lots of different strategies that I think would help us. Something that you said, what makes you different from the other candidates? I actually have a 9-year-old that will be going to 4th grade, and I actually have a freshman in high school. And that's very different from the other candidates. So I've got to make sure I support these teachers and these principals and the people in the buildings, because I've got to get it right, because I will actually have children attending Monroe County schools. And that separates me from everyone else just in the fact that I've got a big vested interest right there in my home each day to make sure we get it right.
J.K. Harrell.
This has already been covered.
Is that?
Yeah, whenever Evans actually was covered by Evans. You want to do this one? Really? Okay.
Since it's a forum for the candidates.
The first one, I had several questions. The first one was actually covered in the first question here, so that kind of made me feel good that that was already taken care of. Should you be the one selected, would you agree to be looked at, to be evaluated on the honesty that you have been judged on in this process. And if it were found that what you have said was not true, would you resign?
I totally anticipate, and I'm not sure what the board's evaluation process, something I think the board was very smart in doing. The contract here is only for 2 years. So whoever comes in has to have the ability to come in, not do a lot of changes, but instead build on the good work that has already been done, roll up their sleeves, and get started. Doing it that way, I totally anticipate that the person that is selected for this job is employed by the board. And so the board, as your employer, is going to set what it is they would have you to do, and you're going to have to be able to check in with them. You're going to have to be accountable to your board. And so you're going to have a very, very good working relationship with your board, and there's got to be lots of checks and balances. So saying, do I anticipate if something comes up not to be true or not to be founded? Absolutely. I think that the board should hold whomever it is accountable, and you very much should resign. If you find that you're being ineffective, and you're not able to lead and get the buy-in, and you're not doing what is best for your children and the faculty and staff here in Monroe County, very much. I think that door swings 2 ways. I think you want to be elected for this particular position, but I think that you have to have some moral fiber to say, I'm not the person, I'm not the lady for the job, and then bow out gracefully so that someone can take care of these children and families in Monroe County.
When I went through the interview process, I treated each one of the questions that I was asked almost like a checklist. So when I answered their questions, I gave them a document that went with each question that was a checklist of what I would do. It's very easy for them at this point to take those 5 documents and look at that and see, well, you know, you said you would do this and this and this and this for a low improving school, and you said you would do this and this and this. I absolutely, if I were not doing the things that I outlined to you on how I would handle this job, I would resign, yes.
I've answered each question as honestly as I know to answer them, and straightforward and transparently. And in my circumstance, if the majority of the board felt like I needed to step aside, they would just need to let me know, and then I would step aside. So, thank you.
Kim Pennington. I could all.
Hello, I am Kim Pennington. I'm a retired teacher from Monroe County. I taught for 32 years. I began in 1980, and I actually lived through this transition of finding a new director and so forth. So it's very important to me that our new director be able to hit the ground running, so to speak. So, in saying that, how has your experience as a central office supervisor or school administrator prepared you to hit the ground running as our new director?
First thing that you're going to have to immediately do when you go into the job is to make sure all vacancies have been filled. Before you can start filling those vacancies out there in the school buildings that I'm talking about, you're going to have to meet with your central office staff and make sure that you are developing an amazing team. Now, there's one person in our central office right now that is assigned way too many duties. She does an incredible job. I've respected working with her for a very long time. But somehow some of the duties that this person has got to be redistributed among the other people a little bit. So that's got to be put into place first. Then you've got to get all of your openings filled, and there are several openings right now. And then one of those openings would be my spot as principal at Tellico Plains Elementary. So you've got to make sure all of those openings are filled. Then you've got in-service training that's just right around the corner. That normally that there's already plans being put into place for that. At this time, all of that's on hold. It's waiting. So that's an immediate, like we're a week or so behind on where we should be on getting that in planning. Then there are lots of things like curriculum that have got to be looked at to make sure that we've got teams and a curriculum plan put into place. We have a textbook situation that has got to be looked at very carefully. We may not, it looks like there's not the funds for those textbooks. My group of people at the elementary school had already been looking at a plan to what we could do if those books were not available. And there are ways to do that. That is a cuttable thing. Not that we want to do that, but that is a cuttable thing that could happen, and you've got to have a plan put into place for that. But the big thing that I've not mentioned here at all, the person that remains in this spot has a budget that has not been finalized. That is going to consume countless hours working with all of these folks, county commission, all the constituents involved in getting that budget put into place. And that is going to be no small task. So there is a whole mix of things that the person taking this on has got to hit the ground running with.
That's a good question, and I feel like that's where my experience at the central office is advantageous, and the fact, I'm saying some of the same things, but the fact that I've worked in a similar school system for 14 years at the central office capacity. I was a principal at a career and technical center. I know about articulation agreements and dual credit. I think I can connect quickly with our principals. I think I can win over the central office staff, and I've lain awake a whole lot at night thinking about our countywide in-service, because I think that would be a critical opportunity to connect to the teachers in terms of expressing what I'm about, what I would do, and then I would actually have to win their heart and souls as they got to know me and saw the decisions. The experience in, I've dealt with discipline of high school students mostly. I think you have to have some experience there. Been involved with safety and security, and I know that's a big part of people's concerns as they look at the school system. I've been on textbook committees for many years, and of course, and again, I repeat, the policy committee. So I think I can establish credibility with these people that I would work alongside and try to lead, and I think that would be very important as we move forward. And due to the fact that I have a lot of experience, I see needs and ideals and practices that I have gained from being in another system that would help me. I just feel like we've got a couple of schools of thought, the local guys or out of county experience, and I feel like I'm a good blend of both. I'm a homeboy, but at the same time, I've had an opportunity to work under some great directors of schools and have got some ideals that I think would be advantageous to the Monroe County school system. Thank you.
So I actually have served in an office of some sort in central office for about 17 years. This would actually be my third time in coming into a new division, a new school district, and hitting the ground running. Tonight, I think I was able to share with several of you, I have a brochure where I laid out my first 100 days of what I thought should happen and take place. But on that brochure, I talk about what are your 4 priorities. And 4 of the priorities have to be to start out, first of all, learning and listening and leading. That's going to be what you get buy-in from. That's what's going to make people say, this is someone I can respect and get behind. And then if you see on my 4 priorities, I said we've got to get ready to open schools. Putting on a county-wide pre-service is a big deal, and it's got to be impactful because that's going to be the tone of your year. For 5 years, I have put on a division-wide in-service for over 1,000 employees in Shelby County. And so I imagine that there are some things that are in place that we need to tweak and get busy. One of the things I think, and you are my former teacher, is that you've got to think that you're not going to just hit the ground running the first 6 weeks or the first 8 weeks or the first 10 weeks. You are really going to be running a race to give the best to the people of Monroe County for the next 24 months. And so I wouldn't want anyone to come into this position and say, I've got to get a great start. I've got to win people over. And then you just it falls to the wayside. What I think you have to do is you've got to put together your plan of what are you going to do for 24 months. So at the end of 24 months, you're able to show and demonstrate to the teachers and to the board, here are our successes. Here are some things we attempted that we failed at, but we want to go back at them again in a different capacity, in a different way. And so I think having done this a couple of times, I've made some mistakes, I've had some wins. I think I could bring those wins to the table to make sure we get started, and I think I can use those losses as things not to replicate in being able to come in and get started on day one.
Pat King.
Hello, my name is Pat King. I have a 2-part question. One is, what tried and true strategy do you have in place that holds principals accountable for hands-on, being present interaction on a regular basis with teachers and students? And the second part is, how would you include consistent strategies for multicultural programs?
Thank you, Ms. King. I think in this age of accountability, our principals, they are very accountable. They are in their schools every day. They fielding numerous phone calls, concerns from teachers, and quite hectic way to earn a living. At the same time, they have to be held accountable for the results of their school. And kind of referencing back in terms of the hiring practices, if a principal has an assistant principal opening, my process there would be somewhat similar to what we talked about, except I feel like the principal needs to be the lead role in terms of hiring the assistant principal. Now, that would come with a lot of consultation with the director of schools, but the principal has to work with the assistant principal on a daily basis. So I think that's one level of accountability for the principal. And then if the principal is dissatisfied with the assistant principal, then, well, I mean, you hired that person, so how are we going to make it work? So far as the multicultural, I think it's very important that we make a commitment to serving the various ethnicities and educate our kids to just be kind to each other, to have programs in place that give equal opportunity to all folks in this community, because we're all just one big community here in Monroe County. So I thank you.
So one of the tried and true strategies when you think about holding principals accountable, absolutely everybody thinks of the principals have an evaluation process. And of course, you're going to go through the principal evaluation process with those particular leaders of the school. Something that I also would like to see put in place is something called an insight survey. And in the insight survey, faculty members and parents and even students are allowed to respond about the school. What do you think academically is going on? What is your culture and climate like in your school? And not because it needs to be a gotcha. If I don't know what I'm doing wrong, how do I improve? I've got to have data and information to be able to do that. And so it wouldn't be a gotcha, it wouldn't be any retaliation, it would be an opportunity as a leader to be able to take interest in what my community is saying about me. What do my students think? Lots of times we frequently think one thing, and then when we get to talking to many, many different people, we find out the problem or the issue or what we could do was something totally different. Another thing that I think is going to be important for the director of schools to do, you're going to have to be in the schools. They will tell you now when I'm running a program, they are going to see me. I have 291 classrooms, and sometimes I am in those classrooms 3 or 4 times a year. Not because it's punitive, but because I don't know how to support and help if I'm not in those classrooms, seeing what the instruction looks like, seeing what are some things that we can improve, talking to people. And one of the things I do with my administrative staff, my directors and managers, every Tuesday and Thursday morning, it is a requirement that we are out at schools. I'm out at schools, and my top-level administrative staff, they are required to be out at schools. I know that principals frequently have lots of teacher evaluations that they must conduct and they must complete. But one thing that I would say is, frequently, you need to be able to walk in a classroom, sit down for 15, 20 minutes, and listen and look and learn about what is going on without you having to script and actually do an evaluation. And so I think that would be another opportunity for administrators to figure out and be present. Something else you said is multicultural programs. How would you address those? I think that you go back. I think you go back to the schools. I think you look at the composition of the student body. I think that you look at national holidays. I think you look at your world languages programs. And I think about what are the different activities that we could do as a school. Not a one-time, it's Black History Month, but what is going on in the world around us and what are our students taking interest in that we can develop a program and buy in around. And I think that's what you go in and you think about. I think you also have to think about your student body and your teaching staff. Is it reflective of students that are there at that school so that everybody feels like they see themselves there in that academic building? Thank you.
In my current position, I try to be at work every morning between 6:30 and 6:45. I don't know how many conversations I have with bus drivers before the day even starts. I don't know how many conversations I have with parents before the day starts because I know they're busy, they're trying to get to work, and that gives them a chance to come in and see me really quick and have a word. Every morning I go down to the bus duty room where the kids are, and I'm the one leading them out of the gym into those classrooms. I've done that for a very long time. That gives me the opportunity to interact with kids constantly. I make a really strong effort to try to learn every kid in my school's name. It's thousands of kids now, and after they pass me, it's hard to remember when you're 19 what you looked like at 9 when they come up to me and say, "Oh, Mr. Hooper, don't you remember?" It's really hard, but I've worked hard at trying to remember all those little names and how important every single one of those people are. You rarely will find me in my office in the building that I'm in now because I'm out into those rooms doing different things. A lot of times I might even just have something that needs to be delivered to all the teachers. Rather than sticking it in the mailbox, I take it around to all of them just to give myself a reason to be in those classrooms and seeing what's going on. Because sometimes on those evaluations, if they know you're coming, no matter who you are, you can put together a good program. But if you're in there all the time and you're consistently seeing those things that they showed you in those evaluations, you know what you've been told is good and true. So I would suspect at the next level, I would continue being out and involved with the different schools as much as I possibly could. From a multicultural aspect, every single child in your school is important, and I try to work from that standpoint. So you would try to recognize and be compassionate about all the different cultures that you have to live with and work with during the school year.
Melanie Phillips.
First, I'd like to say that I know each candidate personally, and I want to say that I admire and respect each one of you for putting yourself out there, for bringing your personal lives into the public forum of this position. I know it's been a very stressful time for each of you and your families. I know the last few weeks have been very stressful for each of you. My question is for Dr. McClendon. And it's not to be controversial, it's not to be in any way derogatory in any sort, but as you alluded to in the beginning of your introduction, there's been a lot of reports based on your current working condition and your current position in Shelby County school system, with lawsuits and administrative leave and things like that. My question, I feel like the community would like to know, is what is your current status with the Shelby County school system? And if you could elaborate what that is and what led to that condition.
So let me clarify, there's not a lawsuit. Just to go back and be transparent, I think as I was at the board meeting the other night and then here at the beginning, we have a process in our school district. And that process is if someone writes an anonymous letter, or even if they write a letter and they sign their name, because we are such a large district, and one of the things I said the other night at the board meeting is when we buy textbooks, typically smaller districts like this, they might buy $1 million worth of textbook or $800,000. When we buy textbooks, we buy $4 or $5 million worth of textbooks because there are 40,000 children. And so just to protect myself, other employees, when people make allegations, they are investigated. One thing that I'll reiterate, I've not done anything wrong. I am glad that they investigate. As I said, my children actually attend schools there in the Memphis area, and I think anytime you have children there, I think that you have to make sure you're being protective of them. Now, let me say this about the type of leader I am. I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to always make the decision, even when it is a tough decision or a hard decision. I'm going to do what is right, and I'm going to do what is best for children and family and the majority. That always doesn't make you be popular, because there are people that have interest, and in having interest, sometimes people get mad. And my understanding is, I think there's some anonymous letter writing that goes on here, even in Monroe County. And so having said that, I respect the opportunity to come before you guys and say, they have written a letter, there's never been a lawsuit, there is an investigation that is occurring, and I'm glad that it occurs, and I anticipate, just like anything else, the investigation will occur, they'll clear, we'll move on. But I appreciate that I work in a school district where we care about children and teachers, and we address people's concerns. Thank you.
Melanie, did you have another one?
So what they're doing now is they actually have an investigation. There are several parts to an investigation. My particular part I have completed. I am done. That is the end of the part that I am allowed to discuss. I do know there are other parts that are taking place, because what happens in an investigation, there's more than one part, and there are more than just myself that might be involved in what is happening and taking place. I think if you would go on, there has been a statement made with Channel 10 News. I think I read it or heard it before I came in, and I think it gives a very good and very clear explanation. And I think I would like to refer you guys to reading that, because I think it'll give you all the details that you maybe are thinking or asking that you want to know.
Cynthia? What? Yeah, one more.
Good evening. My question is for all three candidates. In lieu of our present financial situation, how do you conceptualize a solution that will keep teachers employed, insurance stable, attend to the needs of our students, repair our buildings, and balance the budget? Thank you.
Obviously, spending more money than what you have is not possible. We only have X amount of dollars to work with. Now, there might be a possibility that County Commission might give us a little more money, and I'm hoping that is on its way, that a little more money can be brought into the budget. But a little more money is not going to accomplish all of those things that she just said in her question. It's going to have to be a give and take. There's going to have to be a little more money to take care of some things, and there is going to have to be some cuts. Now, as much as I hate it, because standards were reviewed and changed in social studies, and our social studies materials are so far out of date. But there are other options besides a textbook that are available to teachers. So if that, I think it's $360,000, we could probably make that cut this year. And this year we could make that work. Next year, no. Next year, because literacy is one of what I consider to be the most important topic, and maybe it's because I work with elementary, I don't know. But next year, that textbook budget is going to be $560,000. And we have to have those new materials in literacy next year. Literacy has changed dramatically. So maybe if we give on the social studies this year, then next year there'll be money for the literacy. We have got to, I've looked at the budget line by line. I did comparisons on the utility bills on a couple of schools. There were reasons for all the different costs when I saw differences there. But we're going to have to really tighten our belt and make every penny count. The day after we had that conversation about the utilities, I went and met with Philip, and we reset the air conditioning in my gym to where it comes on and goes off at different times, and that's probably like heating 4 houses or cooling 4 houses in that gym. So surely that would be some cost savings. Everywhere possible, we've got to look at cost savings. When those kids are pulling those paper towels, one paper towel, when they're pumping that soap 50 times, one pump is, I mean, every little place like that we can look to save a penny. That's what's going to have to happen.
So I guess at this point, she asked a lot of good things. How are you going to do all that? And I think none of us thought about when we applied that we would have to be magicians and figure out how to do all that. But I think that when you go back and you're looking at the budget, you've got to look at what you have to have. You have to have your instructional staff. There's just nothing, we're about schools, we're about educating children, and so we know that's got to be a protected space. We know that we are able to retain our talent and attract new talent because of the insurance that is in place here. And so we know that those are things, there's been an MOU, so we know that has to stay in our budget. I think at that particular time, you start looking through and prioritizing the rest of the items that are in your budget. You start working with the community, you work with the principals, you work with your board, and you determine what are things that we could either cut from our budget or what could we delay until later in our particular budget. And I think that's how you go through. I think you'd be remiss to stand up here and say what you would do, because you really don't have a good picture until you get in there and you start tunneling through that budget as to what you could do or what people might be able to negotiate and sort of give up. And so that's why I'm thinking that the best answer is to protect your teachers, make sure that insurance, because it's such a big draw, stays in place. And then I think you begin to look at resources and projects and other things and figure out how to come in and provide and support them in balancing your budget.
One of the ideals I would like to incorporate in time is establish a budget committee involving board members and myself, as we in a transparent way look at the needs and wants of the school system. I would propose we do a needs assessment and try to establish what our priorities would be. When you have recurring costs like you have in professional salaries and paraprofessional salaries and the insurance, you know what's going to be spent next year. I have ideals about over time trying to get our budget in a better position. I would hope to, through attrition, you know, as we have positions come open where they're not essential in that time, to put a hold on there and get this thing in order. I mean, you can't spend more than you bring in. It's a very fundamental problem. Now, looking at this year's budget, I was at the commissioner and the board's meeting the other day, and I recognize that textbooks are a sensitive, symbolic part of the discussion that's on the table. I would want to look at that. I would want to look at other expenditures that are taking place in the system. I know that we've referenced earlier the maintenance budget. I've looked at that. I thought Philip Carroll did a remarkable job the other night of explaining all those costs. I think you will have to look at small ways of saving, whether it's paper towels or soap or whatever, but try every way in the world to try to get things in order. Again, I do have some ideas over time, but I like what Dr. McClendon said. You know, a magician may need to wave this wand. I would need to get deeper into this particular budget and the process and the priorities of the board, and as we work together, try to present something to the in a balanced budget to the county commission. I also, though, think open communication and honest communication with your county commission to try to generate additional funding revenue would be part of what we need to do, and I know you've already attempted to do that, but I think that a strong advocate for additional funding would be a consideration as well. Thank you.
Nancy, this is our last question.
Hi. Thank you for being here. What is the main goal you have set for your personal growth in the upcoming year?
So I think when you think about you coming into a new and different role or position, and you have a new and different community, a couple of things I think that you have to think about right off the bat is you've got to not only continue to support and grow principals and teachers and others, you've got to continue to support yourself. And one of the things that I think that you've got to do is you've got to attend PD. The state actually gives pretty good PD for superintendents. They have superintendent's academies, they have superintendent workshop, they have superintendent training. I think you also have to look outside the state to what are some of the innovative or cutting edge that you're doing. I know one of the things that's going on here at Sequoia High School is they have an interest in STEM. And lots of people in the community are very excited about that. Well, you should, if you're going to be the leader of not a district of separate schools, but a school district, anything that people are taking an interest of in your school, you need to be accountable of having and gaining lots of content information. And so I think the person who sits in this particular seat, whatever your community and your schools are taking an interest in, you need to become a resource and an expert. Something else that you need to do is you need to begin to have what we call book studies. And so not only do you need to have a book study with your central office staff where you're growing and you're learning together, but you also need to be doing that with your administrators in your building, and then suggesting and recommending that they do that with their teachers. One thing about educators, you have got to continue to be a lifelong learner. Nothing ever stays the same in education. It's the pendulum, and it swings one way and it swings back the next. And so if you are responsible, and you have to make sure you are holding your own self responsible and accountable and making sure you are continuing to grow as a lifelong learner yourself. I think this is our last question, and so I would like to thank the principal here at Sequoia High School for making sure we had a lovely facility and space to have this in this evening. Thank you so much, Ms. Tipton.
That would be a three-part answer for me on that one, too. On the 13th of this month, I had scheduled myself to become a principal evaluator. At this point, I had not been through the training of that. but I needed to be at the meeting, so I canceled my day of principal evaluator training. So on my professional learning, there are some trainings that I'm immediately going to have to get involved in and doing. Secondly, I'm going to need to develop a network of area directors that I'm able to talk with. So I'm going to have to be able to network with some people in our neighboring counties and other places. That would be very important to me, that I am able to network. And thirdly, one of the most important things to me, again, is reading instruction. Now, I went through a whole series of training last year on literacy in the elementary schools and how that has changed so dramatically. I know in the content areas in high school, you're teaching content, but somehow reading strategies have got to be integrated into that, because at the same time you're teaching those courses, you're improving reading strategies and you're improving ACT test scores. So as part of my professional growth also, I would like to learn about and work with folks on how we improve that reading instruction in the content areas in the high schools.
It was personal goals, right? Okay. But I like Mr. Hooper. I'll have to have some renewal on things in terms of my own memory and the certification for evaluation of principals. So that is needed. I think my personal goal in terms of dealing with the school system is, the big one for me is to earn the employees' trust. I will need to dig real deep into the data that exists here in Monroe County and get intimately aware of the district level data as well as the school level data. I would want to work with our leadership and establish strong staff development opportunities for our teachers. Dr. McClendon referenced a leadership academy. I would be promoting an aspiring administrators academy, which would allow folks an opportunity to delve into those areas to be potential administrators in Monroe County. And I like this lifelong learner thing. We never quit learning. If we do, we cease to grow. And that was one of the reasons that I pursued my doctorate many years ago, and was I believe in lifelong learning. I wanted to model it as a professional, and it was just a personal goal, and I was glad I was able to achieve that before my mother passed away. So that pretty much sums up the things I'd like to do better. I would also like to thank everyone that's come tonight. Each of you are very concerned about the future of Monroe County education, and I just want to thank you for coming, and thank you.
This concludes our meeting for tonight. We have 3 great candidates, and it's a very hard decision. So remember us all Thursday night when we narrow it down to our new director of schools. So you all are dismissed at this time.